I'm going to go ahead and hit record now. That way I don't forget, because I'm notorious for that. I still don't see Cal joining us yet.
No.
So I don't know quite.
I'm sure he'll make it here eventually.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to welcome you all to the final Broadening Active Engagement through Asset Mapping breakout session. If you've attended our prior sessions, we appreciate you returning to continue the discussion. For those of you who may be new to the group, let's start with a few introductions. So I'm Beth Demke. I'm the president of the North Dakota STEM ecosystem and the executive director of Gateway to Science, which is a hands-on science center in Bismarck, North Dakota. And I'll ask my co-presenters to introduce themselves. We have Mary Margaret Small, Joanne Coggin, and Cal Manis. Go ahead in that order, if you would.
Hey, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. I'm Mary Margaret Small. I'm the Director of Educational Partnerships at Clarkson University, a small private college in upstate New York, right at the Canadian border. I'm also the coordinator of the North Country STEM ecosystem, which spans 7 counties and a whole lot of rural territory. So this is really exciting to be able to connect with people who share a rural experience. And I'll throw it to Joanne.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Joanne. I'm in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. I currently don't have a job, but I am in my own time leading Symbiosis, our province-wide STEAM learning ecosystem. We have 4 regional hubs. I have 4 regional hub leads that I work with. Even though Vancouver is a big city, and I say that, you know, loosely, because big city in Canada is very different from big city in the US and from England, where I come from. But yeah, 2/3 of the province of British Columbia are remote and rural, and I think, I don't know, there are about 90 extremely remote and rural communities that are difficult to get to, often just by float plane or boat or train. There are no roads in or out. And many of those communities are Indigenous communities, and our focus is to reach those remote rural communities that you typically have a harder time getting to. Thanks, nice to meet you all, and I'll pass it over to Cal.
Thank you, Joanne. So my name is Cal Manis. I am the director for the Rural Activation and Innovation Network, which is an NSF-funded study on rural, remote, and tribal STEM ecosystems. Those are being done throughout rural Arizona. And I don't know if you heard Jeremy. So I have 2 houses. One is under 4 feet of snow and I can't get to, up in the mountains. And one has 2 inches of snow and is easily accessible, which is where I'm at now. So, but right now I'm down by the Mexican border. I'm about 15 minutes from the Mexican border, southeast of Arizona. I'm really excited. We have done some amazing things and heard from some great people over the last few months. And like everybody else, I think the time between number 2 and number 3, our meetings was a little too long. It would have been nice to be shorter and engage a bit more with everybody. Today, we are really honored to hear from several people who are going to share their programs with us. And so, Beth?
Yeah, thanks. This has been a lot of fun in just the planning, the behind the scenes things as well. So in our first sessions, we presented an overview of the asset mapping process, followed by 3 case studies. Those of you that were with us all along the way, you've been in on that. If you didn't get that and would like that background information, it's readily available. We'll make sure that you get that information. Our third session was a chance for participants to share their ideas, ask questions. It was very conversational. And now this session, as Cal mentioned, we're fortunate to have 3 guest presenters who are going to present to us some experiences and lessons learned from their STEM ecosystems. So we're going to go ahead and just start right off with Rachel Van Schoik? Did I say that even close? With the Science Action Club. So I'll let you go ahead, Rachel.
Hi, good morning, everybody. It's Skoik and it's not phonetic, so nobody ever gets it. I've had friends for years who still can't pronounce my last name, so all is forgiven. It's a tricky one. Good morning. Cal's cat looks a lot happier than mine. I just found him outside in the rain. So scratching at the window. I don't know what happened. I think my housemate let him out and forgot to bring him back in. I am in San Francisco, which is not a rural community, but I manage Science Action Club, which is a citizen science and STEM learning program that works nationally. So we work across a lot of different programs. I have some slides that I'd like to share and just walk through this morning, but since it's such a small group and I see some familiar faces here, hi Dale, who used to be involved in Science Action Club. I can present the slides, but I want to welcome more of like conversational style. So please feel free to interrupt, to jump off of mute in case I miss anything in the chat as I'm going. So let me.
Rachel, can I just interrupt you just
please.
a second? I'm sorry. Kelly, did you want to? Are you still there? So Kelly put a link in the chat for a contact list. So we're going to create a spreadsheet and then share it with everybody that's here. So if you would be kind enough at some point in the next hour or so to go over and fill in your line, that would be amazing. So
yeah, happy to.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. I welcome questions, interruptions, more cats, anything that you'll have. It's great. So yeah, I'll give a brief overview of our program, where we're at, how we work, and then I welcome some questions and conversation afterwards. Science Action Club is a program that's out of the California Academy of Sciences, which is a science museum in San Francisco. We are currently closed. We have a pretty strict shelter-in-place requirements in this area, so we aren't currently operating that way, but a lot of our programs are still running. Outside of Science Action Club, which is still pretty active, we've had a lot of really exciting programs that come out of the Academy, including Breakfast Club program, which I really like. It's a lecture series, and most recently we've had our staff virologist speak on there about COVID and talking about all the latest updates and facts and things like that. So that was really helpful and exciting. I'll drop a link into the chat later on. I can't manage all of the screens all at once, so forgive me for that, but I'll share those resources a little bit later. Moving on, Science Action Club in a nutshell, just to give a high-level overview, is a training program. It is a curriculum program, and it provides materials and resources to get STEM learning and to get science practices into out-of-school time programs. We work all across the country with all different kinds of out-of-school time programs based in museums, libraries, after school, all kinds of stuff. And our 3 tiers that we work under is what you see in the slide. So we provide professional development for those frontline staff. We know how important that is to get folks trained and prepared. Science can be a little scary, so we want to make sure that folks feel excited and comfortable to teach it. We ship out kits of materials, and then the curriculum that we provide is based in citizen science. So we use that as a tool and a mechanism to get middle schoolers specifically engaged in the scientific process and really feeling like they have a place in science. They can see themselves in that. These are the citizen science projects that we work on. So eBird, iNaturalist, which is also a program out of the California Academy of Sciences, and then Globe Observer that feeds up into NASA, which is really exciting. So why citizen science? We chose it, and we know it's a tool that incites curiosity, both in adults and youth. It helps contribute to authentic science. So you're doing real science. You know, you're not stepping away from the process, but you're engaging in that process when you do citizen science. And it helps build that STEM identity for folks. So we use that to help practice those skills with youth and get them engaged in what they're doing. And Science Action Club, we do provide this, you know, we enroll folks, we train them, but we also really try to be a resource and a hub for folks. And one of the big conversations we're having on our team right now is, do we shift our language away from citizen science to community science? Some of y'all might be seeing this conversation. Citizen might not be the most inclusive term. Community science might be more inviting of a term. So kind of where do we stand in all of this? So that's one of the conversations and thoughts we've been having recently. So what does Science Action Club look like across the country? I said that we are a national program. We've worked in over 30 states. We've worked with over 63,000 adults and youth all across the country. And about 40% of those fall into rural communities. Citizen science is a tool that can be used in all spaces. It's as powerful here in San Francisco as it is in different communities across the country. So we've had a lot of success with that. One example I wanted to highlight is a trainer that we worked with in Alaska, which is a really exciting partnership. Alaska is known for its amazing beauty, landscapes, but limited science access. And especially in an economy that relies so strongly on STEM careers and on STEM learning, we saw a real opportunity there. We found a local ambassador who just was excited about the program and ran with it, and ran hundreds of clubs in Alaska, which was very exciting. They even found bugs in the middle of wintertime in Alaska for their citizen science project. So they had a lot of fun with that. I'll drop a link in a little bit later of a video that highlights that partnership just to see Science Action Club in action a little more. But I didn't want to kind of be a talking head this morning, so I brought one really quick activity from Science Action Club here, which is Spot the Differences. This is from our Bird Scouts program. And this is an example of how we've taken some of our activities and implemented them online. So Science Action Club was designed to be a hands-on program, decide to get kids together, get them outside in the dirt. That has changed quite a bit in the past year. We have many programs that are running virtually, and we've developed some resources to make it nice and easy for folks just to take the program and transfer it online, including this type of activity. So you can put on your middle schooler hats today if anybody feels like being a middle schooler again. And look at this picture, and usually how I facilitate this, I say you have 3 minutes. I'm going to put the clock on, get a piece of paper and write out as many differences as you see between these two pictures in that 3 minutes. So some of the first things that pop out to me are the differences in the red head, the pattern. As I look at it more, I see differences in the leaves. There's food on the left. I see an acorn versus not. So it really is an amazing example of observation and the power of just honing in on one species, on one type of animal, and even one habitat to get your observation skills up. So this is a really minute example of how Science Action Club is run. From here, they practice more bird observation skills. They practice how to sneak up to birds so they can use binoculars and not be loud and be able to get good observations. So the skills kind of build on each other, both virtually and in person. And they culminate with doing citizen science observations and submitting it to the app and then looking at their data and observing it. So wanted to have a little bit of fun this morning with that observation. Ooh, let me go back 2 slides here. I also wanted to give you just a brief look into our trainings. So we have both an online training that's facilitated any place, anytime. So if you have a group you're working with and they want to just start Science Action Club immediately, we can get that training out to them. it not only does it go over the activities that we facilitate, but it gives them background information into birds, bugs, or clouds, whatever the topic is. And it also gives them tips about how to be a really good STEM facilitator. All of y'all are probably seasoned and comfortable leading activities, but a lot of the staff that we work with maybe are, learning those skills a little bit more, and they need a little bit more practice and professional development and all of that. So we provide that, and we give them some good tools to use so they're excited, so they're comfortable, so they bring that enthusiasm to the youth out there. So these are some screenshots from our online training. We also offer customized trainings to get your staff ready, all that good stuff, which are also virtual these days. I did want to kind of call out price points for Science Action Club. We are an earned revenue program. That being said, we do what I like to call it, you call the shots. I don't, you know your program, you know your budget, you know your community best. And we're just here to kind of support the STEM learning, and we're here to support engaging in nature, getting outdoors. So we offer this as a guidepost. We offer this as a way to kind of meet in the middle. We are also at a nonprofit. We are also trying to sustain our program, but we understand that budgets right now are challenging. So the You Call the Shots program is, if you're interested, you kind of tell us where you're at and what you can contribute to purchasing the kits and the training. And that includes fee waivers. We've had lots of programs that have requested and gotten fee waivers these days. Specifically, I worked with the San Francisco Unified Community Learning Hubs and gave them some kits so that they could have some STEM engagement at the local hubs that we have here in the city. So that was one opportunity. We don't want it to be a barrier. We want access to get out there. And last but not least, contact information. I'll pop it in that contact sheet that Cal mentioned at the beginning, so we can chat after this. But I will pause there. I'm going to stop the screen share so I can see your faces larger, and see if there's any questions or comments about this type of work that we're doing. I do also want to call out that Dale was previously involved in this project many years ago. It's great to see you again. So yeah, we've had lots of cool partners across the country.
I'll just add, it was a really good project. It focuses on middle school. I'm in a children's museum, so we tend to reach up through 5th grade, and this was originally for middle schoolers, but it was pretty adaptable. We had some groups that were 5th graders coming in, and we were able to use it in that way as well.
Definitely, yeah. We say middle school is 5th to 8th. We've seen a lot of success in upper elementary too, and we welcome that. Again, same with the price point of the program. We trust y'all. We know you know your students in your community, so if you think you have a group of 4th graders that would kick butt in Science Action Club, we welcome that as well. So yeah, this is
talking. Could I just ask you to talk about your impact and what, if you saw differences between your rural and urban communities? Given that this is sort of a rural focus group, it seems like you might have some really cool insights about that. I don't know.
No, we have been collecting that data for years. We have an external evaluation firm that looks at it. We have teacher evaluations that we do, as well as student evaluations that we do. And we've tried to find differences in rural versus urban communities, and we have not seen strong patterns across that, which we attribute to the fact that citizen science is kind of a tool that is applicable across all communities, and that STEM learning in this kind of environment is really powerful across these communities as well. I'm happy to drop in our impact report too, so we can give a little bit more specific data from the evaluation reports. One thing I will add, which is really interesting from our data, is we see a lot more competence and comfort from our online training. When educators go through it afterwards, they say, I'm more ready to teach Science Action Club, I'm more comfortable with STEM learning. And then when they go through another level of training from there, so if they do a Science Action Club activity leader training, which is facilitated by our staff, and you practice and you get some more skills, we find that their confidence and comfort goes even higher, which is just really cool to point out that the professional development that all of y'all's programs are offering is really powerful and really needed. And that having facilitators and having those touch points is really valuable. And I think it's something that can be baked into our planning a lot more. Yeah, Cal, thank you for raising your hand.
I'm raising my hand, right? I was a teacher way too long. I have a question about your program and leveraging local assets. So a lot of what we're doing here is work on asset development and asset awareness and using those for our programs. Has your program done that? And if so, how?
I apologize. I was not at the asset mapping last meeting. I attended the first convening that y'all did. So when you say asset mapping, is it finding community members, finding community resources that can be brought together to build a community of practice? And
well, that sometimes, yes, in some of the more rural communities, it's more looking at their environments, right? And seeing that they just don't live out in the middle of nowhere. They have a lot of STEM assets right at hand. All they have to do is really restructure the way they see it, right? And so if you're looking at the difference between a northern flicker and a red-bellied woodpecker, what other birds are in your area, and are they seasonal? Is there phenology work? Stuff like that. Do you help to guide that thought process at all?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think our program does. I see citizen science as the gateway tool to giving more opportunities and kind of observing environments. I think the reason why we chose middle school specifically is that that's a time where a lot of youth, especially young women and youth of color, kind of lose interest in STEM and kind of say, this is not for me. And they step away from observing their environment and step away from engaging in these enrichment activities. So we've seen a lot of activities, we've seen a lot of clubs really take Science Action Club and have it bloom and blossom into this larger project where they're using the citizen science projects within each of those units to really expand the youth's understanding. A lot of the activities prompt them to go out and do calls of action or discuss with family members or reach out to community members and think about ways that they can, from their observations and from their data collection, design solutions that are helping their local environment. So, citizen science, the apps are universal tools. We see them globally, but they really are designed to be specific to those communities and localized. I hope I'm answering your question, and I want to engage more in the asset mapping conversation that y'all are having so I can kind of get a deeper understanding of this.
This is great. Thank you, Rachel. That's awesome. We're going to have a chance to hear more from Rachel and ask more questions, but I'm going to ask to move on to our next presenter. We're going to do 3 presentations, little question and answer for each, and then we'll have more time and continue the conversation with everybody. So our next presenter, so again, thank you, Rachel. Awesome.
Thank you.
Our next presenter is David Garb. Is it Garb or Garby? With the Pennsylvania Society for Biomedical Research. He shared some interesting info, and it looks like he is already starting to share his screen. Is that going to work for us? I hope so. So take it away, David.
All right, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. And can you see my screen? Let's see if I can go this way.
I see lots of little boxes. There's a presentation starting. Thank you.
All right. Awesome. A couple disclaimers here. One is I'm presenting from my iPad and I can't see anybody else while I'm presenting. So it could be a challenge if you're going to try to type in the chat box, but I think we'll make it work. And disclaimer 2 is I just got back from picking up my daughter, so I missed a good portion of the first session. So If I say anything that's repetitive, I apologize, but I needed to get my daughter from school. She just went back last week in a hybrid model. So hopefully this will work. Let's see. Bear with me. All right, did it change? Did the slides change? Can somebody just give me a yes or no verbally?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you very much. So I'm gonna start with just a brief introduction to who I am. Again, my name is David Garby, and I am a scientist by training. I did science both in the academic world and for a pharmaceutical for a short period of time, a pharmaceutical company for a short period of time, for over 16 years combined. I did some teaching as an adjunct professor at colleges and universities local to Philadelphia, which is where I reside. And hopefully you're all not saying, well, that's not rural, and I'm gonna get into that in a sec. But now I work for a nonprofit organization doing community outreach and sharing my love of science and my science experiences with students and communities and schools. I also like to share who I am personally. This is really important for me to do mostly with students, but I figured I would throw it into this presentation as well. I think it's good for a student to be able to connect with me as I present to them and interact with them, and they kind of know who I am on a personal level as well. So I often share things like, you know, I am a husband. I've been married for over 16 years. I have 2 daughters in middle school. We have 2 dogs, and we live in New Jersey. So that's just a brief overview of who I am personally as well. And I would get into that into a little bit more depth with my students. So I am the Director of Outreach and Education for a statewide organization in Pennsylvania. It's called the Pennsylvania Society for Biomedical Research. And admittedly, that is a mouthful. So we'll probably be referring to the organization as PSBR moving forward. And I guess a third disclaimer should be, you know, we are focused on STEM topics, but as you can tell by our name, we have a very kind of a more specific niche in science. We are educating the public and students and communities about biomedical science. Specifically, I think there's a lot of overlap, but you know, when we aren't doing robotics, we don't do a ton of coding and activities like that. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We were established in the early 90s, although the name says Pennsylvania, and that is a majority of where we do most of our outreach. We also serve students in schools in New Jersey and Delaware as well. We want to educate the public about biomedical science and biomedical research. That is the main driving force of the organization. We also advocate for the humane and responsible use of animals in biomedical science and biomedical research. And since 2012, we've reached over 40,000 students, and that number has been climbing, except for 2020. Our educational goals: we want to engage students in scientific inquiry-based classroom activities, excite students about STEM and science-related careers, and champion for the importance of and benefits of biomedical science and biomedical research. And this is, I think, even more glaringly apparent in today's pandemic world. Obviously, we now have a vaccine that's being distributed. That vaccine was amazingly created in under a year, and that is the efforts, the Herculean efforts of biomedical scientists and all of the people that have supported the study of the virus and the production of the vaccine. So if you go to our website, you'll see some of our programs. They include essay and poster contests. We just started a digital media contest last year as well. We do a majority of what I do is classroom visits directly, or these days virtually. We also have a couple of other partnerships that provide us with some of our bioscience programming. One of our main partners during the spring is called BioEyes. They are another nonprofit organization based out of Philadelphia. And I'm going to quickly touch on a couple of these just to give you an understanding of some of the programming that we can offer our teachers, and some that are appealing to areas that might not have access to additional STEM resources or science resources. So the first one is going to be focused on using live animals, in this case, rats, in the classroom. And this is a very popular program for us. It's called the Great Grow Along, or GGA. And this program will take about 4 to 6 weeks to run in your classroom. We have the curriculum all written out, and the one thing that has to be done is a 4-week feeding experiment, which is why we say 4 to 6 weeks. And there's other extension and supplemental activities as well. But this activity brings together both the scientific process, biomedical science, and concepts surrounding nutrition, which is important, I think, for our youth. Students and teachers will use live animals that are donated and supplied by the organization in the class to do science. Everything, I should say, for this activity in this program is free for teachers in Pennsylvania. Students learn how to ask questions, make observations, interpret the results, and draw conclusions throughout the process. And they witness the effects of nutrition on growth. And this offers the opportunity for them to challenge and to reflect upon their own feeding behaviors or food behaviors. At the end of the experiment, they will be able to plot data, which is important for integrating into interdisciplinary approaches like math. So a quick overview of this experiment. What happens is we will send you 2 groups of animals, 2 groups of rats, whether that's 1 rat in each group, or we will also offer the ability to get 4 rats per group. And those 2 groups, everything is the same except for 1 variable, and it's what they're drinking. So they get the same food, they get the same diet, and the only thing that's different is 1 rat will get milk and 1 rat will get experimental sugar water to represent sugar heavy juices and sodas and things like that. And this is just a quick summary of the data that the students will produce. What you notice is that the rats that get fed milk over the course of the first 3 to 4 weeks will grow, in this case, based on weight. Students are taking measurements of weight on a every other day basis. What they notice is that the weight of the animals increases when the animals are fed milk instead of the sugar water. And at the 4-week point, we actually take the rats and we then put them all on milk. And you can see that the red line at that point, at the 4-week mark, tends to increase almost immediately over the next week to match the weight of the animal that was fed milk. So this teaches obviously concepts of nutrition, data interpretation, the scientific process, animal care, and even concepts, as I mentioned, surrounding math. This is where we started in 2012. This is just a quick pushpin map of where the program began. And since that time now, this was from 2019, I believe, you could see the expansion of this program throughout the state of Pennsylvania. And what's important is that and again, I want to point this out, is that it allows students and schools and teachers in rural settings to bring this activity into their classrooms free of charge without having any other prior experience or equipment to run this type of science experiment. I'm going to skip these accolades here, but we do receive tons of feedback from teachers and students and even parents. So that was kind of a whirlwind tour of this program called the Great Grow Along. I'm happy to answer additional questions about this. Something else that we do more commonly, or I do more commonly directly into the classrooms prior to the pandemic, is directly interacting with students through classroom visits. I go in and I talk about career presentations, the value of and ethics of working with animals to do biomedical science. I'll take some of my content knowledge and reinforce classroom instruction in a fun way for students. And oftentimes we will bring in hands-on science activities to do with the students as well. Here is the map of our classroom visits. Again, a quick pushpin map showing you where we've been and the visits that we've made. And I should mention, I failed to mention this, I think, on the prior slide, is that these are color coded. So if we've only been to a certain region or location once, you'll see a red pushpin. Obviously 2 to 5 would be blue, and then upwards of 20 plus visits to a general area or to a particular region, then we're upwards of 20 plus classroom visits or school visits to that area. And what I want to point out with this map is that for us, there is this dichotomy of urban Philadelphia schools and surrounding suburbs in the 5-county region around Philadelphia. And you can see our expansion outward into the state. We are now serving more and more rural schools as well. And we expect and hope that that trend continues further out into central and south central Pennsylvania. So, you know, we recognize that there could be these disparate environments in which students are learning, whether that is the urban inner city schools of Philadelphia, whether it's the suburban, what I might consider more affluent suburban settings, and then reaching out into these rural settings where even some of those resources that you can envision being within or near a city, offering those to students, the rural schools may not even have access to those. So we started thinking about this and ways that we wanted to expand our program and strategically expand that program in a thoughtful way. So we did an internal needs assessment and also looked at the needs of our partnering. Saw was that we were serving about 60% middle schools, 25% high schools, and 15% of the general population. We do some elementary work as well, and we're making a push to do more, but that was on the lower side of the scale. We do instruction mostly throughout the school year, which was approximately 37 weeks of the academic school year, but we also do summer instruction with partners through OST and after school programming. On any given week, we might see 2 to 3 schools per week. And depending on the activity that we're doing, we'll spend usually 1 day, but it could be up to 2 or 3 days per school. And again, we initially were targeting schools in and around Philadelphia, but we soon quickly realized that we need to target rural areas as well. So we started thinking about what our target budget would be and what our projected growth is going to be as we expand further into the Commonwealth. And we came up with, we actually contracted with an external partner who helped me flush out some of these ideas. And we did, what did we call it? I forget what it was called, but basically it kind of mathematically calculated what are some good options for us based on the input that I was providing. And one way that we thought about exploring moving our programming further into the state is to, you know, create a ride-on or a board-on, should I say, science lab. You may have heard of some of these. These are oftentimes called mobile science programs. And in this case, we were looking at a gooseneck trailer that students would board once we arrived at the school. You know, this outlines some of the upfront work that we did, looking at how much this would cost to get a program like this off the ground, from the acquisition of the vehicle itself to some of the fixed costs that is associated with a program like this, and then some of the ongoing operating costs as well. And what came out from our internal assessment is that we could also, or sorry, let me just pause for a second here. There are some pros and cons to this type of strategy. A pro is that, you know, I think inside of that trailer, we could fully customize it to meet the needs and for our programming. It provides for a flexible layout inside, and we can change that and modify that. And this is, I think, really exciting and engaging for students, that if you roll up into their parking lot and have them board this science lab, it's a really exciting experience. Some of the cons to a program like this is that it's more expensive, obviously, to build, and there's a longer lead time getting a program like that off the ground. The second way we thought about doing this is nixing the board on, or the ability to have students come on board our trailer and basically just bring everything that we need to the school itself. You can see that the acquisition cost for a vehicle like this is substantially lower. The fixed costs are also lower because there's things that we don't need to think about with this model. And our operating costs are approximately the same because we still have the travel, we still have all the supplies that would be required for both types of programs. Some pros to a cargo van strategy would be we're able to see larger class sizes. You can imagine that if students are boarding on that trailer, we could probably only fit upwards of 24 students, whereas if we are working with them directly in their classrooms, we could see more students this way. It obviously less expensive, as you saw on that last slide, and there's less maintenance, we feel, keeping track or keeping on top of a vehicle than a trailer. Some of the cons is there's less of a wow factor. We feel like, or we felt like it could be less engaging for students. And we also need, at all times, we're going to need the resources or the footprint of that school in order to bring this program to the students, whereas we could park our trailer, if we went that route, in any parking lot that we can find. Both of these offer benefits to the organization as far as regional programming, shared operations, meaning, you know, we anticipate the school paying for part of the visit while we'll be picking up some of the costs of the visit as well. You know, there's better optics, we feel like, for a branded program like this, so we could hopefully increase sponsorship of this program. And it's expandable. This is just a map that was taken from, you know, some of our colleagues here in Pennsylvania that participate or that have developed over the past 10 plus years a mobile ag lab, which is actually where this trailer idea came from. And this picture is actually the mobile ag science program trailer. And they've expanded this program to 6 different regions throughout Pennsylvania, and each region has a dedicated vehicle to serve the students in the districts in these given regions. So another benefit is this program would be expandable. So to bring this home, I wanted to let you know that we decided on the cargo van strategy. We spent some time, you know, coming up with a name, coming up with a brand for it, wrapping this vehicle in graphics. We worked with a graphic designer and a wrapping company to make this hopefully as flashy and as visible as possible. So we can, like I said, create a brand around this program. Just a quick, let's see if this is gonna play. Just a quick video, maybe, if this plays, of what this looks like, maybe not. Oh, here it goes. No, so we incorporated shelves inside of the vehicle so we can store additional supplies. Again, the wrap was created with a graphic designer. If you notice inside the vehicle, we put a bulkhead separating the 2 front seats from the back for both safety reasons. So nothing comes at the driver while we're driving, but also, you know, theft. In case anybody breaks in, there's a barrier to the back with all the equipment. And then we're packing this thing with supplies and equipment to be able to do kind of hands-on, more advanced biomedical, and molecular biology types of experiments and activities. How am I doing on time here? All right, I think I got a couple minutes left. We obviously created a website, which is not yet completely finished, but we have beginner programs, which are more geared towards elementary classrooms. We have intermediate programs, which you could probably figure out are geared toward middle school. And we also have advanced programming that is more geared for high school students. And you know, I like to think that we are currently and have the impact to increase the difference that we're making in students' lives. I often get, you know, based on the programming that we do, I often get cards like this sent to me from the teacher in the mail of their students, and just knowing that a program like this can have an impact on students, especially during this pandemic, you know, I wouldn't envision myself doing anything else at this point. I do want to leave you with some of my contact information here. Again, my name, my title, my email, and some of the Twitter handles, as well as our 2 websites for the organization and for the Spark Science program that you can learn more about. And I'll take questions at this point. I do have some backup slides that I'm working with a workforce development board, or I hope to be working soon with a workforce development board in South Central Pennsylvania, which is more of a rural region in Pennsylvania. And, you know, we are strategizing, and I put together a few slide decks for that group, or a few slides for that group that kind of outlines a three-phase strategy for getting our Spark programming into their region, and hopefully being able to impact their schools and communities as well. So I think I'm going to try to stop sharing now and pause, take any questions.
All right.
And
Thank you, David. That was great. I'm going to allow time for just a question, maybe two. We're running a little longer than I expected, but we've got time. We're good. Tracy's going to come up next, but does anyone have any questions for David? Go ahead, Jean.
David, I'm Jeannie Gogolski. You remember me? We met.
yes.
Great presentation. You
Thank
know,
you.
I noticed you do have some teachers or students that you've trained outside of the state. So is there a cost to that? You said it's free for Pennsylvania students. So we're in Ohio, you know, we're not that far away.
Yeah, you're not that far away. It depends on the program that you're
Okay.
talking about. If you were talking about specifically the Great Grow Along program, which is that classroom-based RAP program based in nutrition, I would love to talk to you a little bit more about that offline. We do require that there is a vendor that provides those animals to the schools. So there are some logistics that need to be worked out. We actually have three vendors that are able to ship to at least 9 different locations throughout the state of Pennsylvania, which hopefully gets those rats close enough to teachers that they can then go pick them up and bring them back to their classroom. We are not allowed to ship them directly to the schools. They have to be shipped to like a research institution or a medical center. So there's a little bit of partnership that needs to be done in the back end, but it's not prohibitive. So I would, you know, if you or anybody else is interested in that program, I would love to talk more about it offline.
Okay, great. Thank you.
David, you have
Thank you.
a couple questions in the chat. Can you see
All right,
those?
let me see. Yeah, I'm gonna go there now.
One from Dale and one from Dora.
Dale said, in what ways do you leverage the assets of your most rural communities? Do you have specific recommendations? Leverage the assets. I'm wondering if you could unmute and expand on that for a second, or think about ways to expand on that in the chat, while I just move to the next question here from Dora. How do you keep your mobile systems going when costs and funding are limited? It's a great question, and this is something that the board of directors, my board of directors, had to think long and hard about, and I had to do a lot of convincing that we are currently a membership-based organization. What does that mean? It means we get, you know, donations from larger industry partners and academic partners that support our mission. Those membership dollars are contracting these days, unfortunately. So we've had to diversify our revenue stream. And by what the pandemic silver lining has allowed me to do is, because I'm not in the car so much or in the van so much traveling from school to school, I've been able to dedicate more of my time and more of my resources to grant writing. So we are actually now attempting to do more foundational grant support for this program in order to keep the costs what we hope will be free of charge for schools. However, if needed, we will put our programming on a sliding scale and hopefully make it reasonable for schools to bring in our programming. Hope that answered your question there.
Thanks, David.
Yes, costs are limited. I mean, funding is limited. So the core of asset mapping is to find the assets in each community and work with the community to support and build those assets. Okay, so if I'm understanding this question now a little bit better, we are reaching out to, I think, what I can call assets are our industry partners in these different regions. Now, there might not be a lot of them specifically in the biomedical science space or field. But for example, one of the partners with which we are currently working in South Central Pennsylvania, actually we have 2 of them. One is called Aptogen, is a small biotech company that creates a particular niche product that can be used in biomedical science and diagnostic purposes. And we're also working with another partner in South Central Pennsylvania called Lampire. They've been gracious enough to allow me to come into their facilities to record what science looks like through their eyes and through their processes. And we're putting together video resources that we can share with other students in other schools and communities to give them an understanding and a better look at what these types of industry partners can offer. Lampire has also been very instrumental in me getting the right connections out into South Central Pennsylvania to explore additional opportunities in ways that biomedical science might be able to be incorporated into the instructional curriculum in those regions. But you're right. I mean, I think working with those assets that are out there, identifying who is doing similar work, who fits within your discipline of interest, and how you can connect with them, it's something that we're still strategically going after.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I think that that really kind of ties up to bring what you were talking about together with our asset mapping focus, which is looking at those rural assets. And you're right, assets are your industry partners, it's educational entities, it's really anyone out there in a rural area that might enhance what you're trying to do. And when you make those connections, it just enriches and enhances those programs. So thank you for that. We will have time, as I said, later to continue these discussions, but we're going to move on to our third presentation. And this is Tracy Salinas. Did I get that one right?
Salinas,
Yes.
that's right.
Okay, with is it Appalachian? Do you guys say Appalachian or Appalachian?
In the Southern Appalachians, it's Appalachian.
Okay, State University. Thank you for being with us, Tracy.
Thank you. I'm very excited to share some of the thoughts that I have here because I think it ties together with so many pieces of the conversations that we've already been having. Some of those that are around asset mapping and broadening participation and what all of that means in a rural area, primarily because as a relatively new director of this center, I am pushing our folks to go through a process of strategic planning, and I am pushing boundaries through that process. I've been working in STEM education for about 22 years, always in very rural areas and always with a very sociological kind of a perspective on how STEM education and policy plays out within rural cultures and contexts. And so now that I'm in this role as director, as of April the 1st of earlier this year, it's given me an opportunity to really challenge some of my colleagues and partners in thinking about what our center looks like moving forward. So I hope that some of those questions that we've raised in this process will be beneficial to you. As a little bit of a setting, because some of you may not know where Appalachian State is unless you keep up with football, which we're pretty good at. We're up in the northwestern corner of North Carolina. That's rural Appalachia. It was only about 30 years ago that they stopped having to drop in food in the winter from helicopters to many of the hollers where there could not be transportation in and out when there were heavy snows. We are very agricultural, but we are not a coal producing part of the state. We are actually #1 in producing Christmas trees and a lot of landscape kind of things in this part of the state. But North Carolina is a very rural state. 80% of the counties are classified rural, and nearly 40% of all the students in the state actually attend rural schools. So this is something that doesn't mesh with the images a lot of people have of North Carolina when they think of Charlotte or Raleigh or Winston-Salem, but it is a very rural state, and it still lags behind in some of the outcomes associated with those areas. I think one of the things I want to put at the front of this presentation, though, is the fact that a lot of folks in STEM disciplines really think of the STEM areas, mathematics, for example, or the sciences, as acultural, or the work that we do in STEM education as kind of existing in its own little bubble. And the reality is that we're engaging, when we work in educational change, we're engaging in socio-political change of some sort, whether it's in the infrastructures within which we work, whether it's in funding structures, in some way, we're interacting within some larger food chain, which I think is part of the reason ecosystem is such an apt way to think about our contexts. So I've always liked this Wendell Berry quote as a way to kind of think through our role within that larger ecosystem. Some of those tensions then that we have when we work within STEM education, I'm going to go through some of those and just acknowledge them. And then I'm going to share with you a little bit of how we've begun taking those tensions and turned them into questions to ask during our strategic planning process. Some of these may apply more than others to some of you in your context. We are on the campus of a four-year institution, 20,000 plus students, part of the University of North Carolina system. So there are some things that come with being located like that that are a little bit different from what you may have. Nonprofits may experience some of these things differently and so on. But a lot of these questions will relate to the partnerships and projects that we engage in. For example, one of those ideas is that STEM centers are often promoting Western notions of science without recognizing or integrating indigenous or other cultural ways of knowing. Sometimes that may be a part of a particular project, but it may not be part of the DNA of the STEM center to include and acknowledge any of the indigenous or cultural ways of knowing that are within the context. So when we're thinking of asset mapping, it's not just these organizational or formal infrastructure kind of places that can be assets. Sometimes there are cultural components that can serve as assets. It may be elders in a particular population. It may be some sort of knowledge collection that is appropriate for that particular culture or that particular geographical area that we may overlook if we're only thinking about formal Western kind of definitions of science. With that in mind, STEM centers can often privilege white-collar STEM disciplines at the expense of blue-collar STEM disciplines, which might actually be more in line with the needs or the ideals of some of our rural partners, our rural community partners. And I say this because as being on a four-year institution campus, a lot of our expectation is to help in the recruitment of students into math and science majors and seeing them successfully through a four-year degree. That might be something in pre-med, it might be something in a physics degree and so on. But a lot of our community partners actually have very vibrant career and technical education programs in their school districts that align really well with post-secondary vocational certification programs or with regional two-year institutions. So as the newer director, I'm challenging my staff and my campus to think about how we play a role in connecting with two-year and certification programming, as well as being kind of a conduit into four-year institutions for a lot of our rural communities. I think another thing, and some of you have alluded to this in talking about how do you afford to keep the van running when funding can be low. And as a side note, I'll say we managed to also get a mobile science unit in the Department of Geographical Sciences. A long time ago, we had a fermentation program that tested wine at wineries around the area, which if you're interested, that's probably a great job, is to travel around and use your chemistry knowledge to test wines for folks. And a corporation had donated a Winnebago, which we renamed the Winebago. And after a while, the connections kind of disappeared, but that Winnebago found a new life as the Geobago, a mobile geology lab. So I thought I would share that. But soft money can be difficult for sustaining long-term partnerships. If we're pursuing grant opportunities, very often those grants themselves may dictate what a partnership looks like without actually taking into consideration what a community needs. Or a grant partnership may define, say, a high needs school, a rural school, something like that, that forces us to target with particular communities who may or may not actually have the needs we're trying to impose on them, or that synthesis between our needs in cultivating grants and getting the money and their needs as a community, it just may or may not coalesce in a way that's actually meaningful to either partner. And another issue can be that a lot of school districts that are rural or classified close to it are actually fairly well performing. And that means sometimes they don't fall under the category of high needs school districts and therefore aren't necessarily eligible for participation in some kind of externally funded projects. As a result, we end up with a lot of rural partners who could use and benefit from grant funding and partnerships, but because of the way the numbers fall, they don't necessarily qualify. And a lot of times they get overlooked then when people are creating grant partnerships or collaborations. Another one is that STEM centers can be underprepared in countering the pedagogy of poverty as it exists among its partners. One thing we do know in a lot of rural school districts is that many of their teachers tend to have fewer years of experience than their non-rural counterparts. They may teach out of their area of licensure. They may be coming from non-traditional licensure pathways. There's a combination of characteristics that can contribute to what's known as the pedagogy of poverty. This idea that when you're in rural or impoverished areas, or add in, whatever adjective you want to, that hands-on learning is kind of beyond those students' capability, that they need more rote instruction before they're ready for hands-on. And so where we as a group may see STEM centers work as contributing to exploration, launching joy in exploring science, providing engineering and computer science opportunities for creativity, a lot of school partners and teachers within them may see those things as the reward at the end of learning the concepts associated with those pieces, as opposed to something to spark on the beginning or to be integrated throughout. And that can be a real challenge. So what we're doing right now is flipping each of those on its head into questions we can ask through strategic planning so that we are intentionally addressing them. I won't go through every question here, but I'm certainly happy to share these slides or anything from our strategic planning process with any of you if you're interested. As a beginning here, the tension between Western science and indigenous or cultural ways of knowing I mentioned, we are asking ourselves, how diverse are the people who are part of our system, our staff, our advisors, our partners? How does our collection of materials that we loan out to teachers and community members, how is it representative of indigenous or cultural ways of knowing? In our region, for example, how are the history of the Cherokee and their interactions with environmental knowledge representing in the materials and collections we have? How could a teacher who comes from one of these very rural areas where there's a deeply entrenched understanding of the ecosystem of Appalachia, simply because of the cultural history there and the social history there, how are those represented, and how might a teacher use our materials to tap into place-based education? Our university is also very active in applying social justice frameworks of various philosophical kinds of foundations in different places. We're a part of that community. We're part of this campus. How do we play a role, either intentionally or unintentionally, in that work? When we're thinking about white collar and blue collar STEM, how can our programming and our choices for activities engage a variety of STEM disciplines? One of the things that I've learned is that our career and technical education folks here on campus have seldom been invited to participate in activities of the center. And for many of our school partners, that's actually one of the best ways to connect with students and ignite their understanding of STEM. It's also where a lot of our STEM education programming happens to be, related to technology and engineering and agricultural science and so on. How can we help our communities challenge notions of who does STEM? And what partnerships will help us to challenge that? It's also, on us to think about how can we challenge our university's pipeline to degree mentality. which kind of defines students within that pipeline as some kind of a commodity that can be successfully completed through the process or lost in some way. When we think about our funding sources, how can we develop funding sources that will support long-term partnerships? Or how do we grow a system of partnerships that can persist through changing funding sources and commitments? How do we provide insight to those who create funding opportunities of what's actually needed and what's missing? The asset mapping that we might do and the identification of how to broaden participation, are the things we're finding in our areas also represented in the funding calls, the calls for proposals or applications that we find? And if not, how do we get a voice in helping them recognize some of those different gaps? When we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, there are lots of definitions for those different terms and lots of different ways they're applied. In fact, in mathematics education, which is my primary background area, there's actually a pretty rich history of working through these areas, but that's a little bit less developed in some of the other areas that we think of as STEM. So how can we use our very integrated perspectives to help share and integrate those ideas of diversity, equity, and inclusion along all of those different areas? How can we push for richer research in how those areas come into play in the STEM areas? Not just because of broadening participation, but in really understanding how students identify as STEM users and thinkers, or how communities identify with STEM. If, for example, a rural community doesn't have an industry partner that's heavy in engineering or technology or computer science, what is there that exists in that community as an asset that can be seen as STEM knowledge, that can be seen as pertaining to their STEM identity, and therefore leveraged into the partnerships and the knowledge that we want to gain there? This diagram is from the network of STEM education centers, and it gives characteristics of those centers. So as we're working through strategic planning and I'm sharing those questions with you, you can see how those questions kind of fit into some of those different pieces. And what I'm suggesting, actually maybe stronger than suggesting, what I am definitely saying is that all of these things occur within a context of culture, within a context that calls for equity in STEM. And it's our responsibility, to the extent that we can, to rethink how our work as STEM education centers or STEM education providers is challenging some of those long-standing assumptions when it comes to those issues and the work that we see in this diagram. None of these bubbles really hints at the role that diversity plays within that. So how can we take a diagram like this, ask those targeted questions, and begin to recognize within what context each of the bubbles or areas on here actually occurs? At our center, some of what we're doing is prompting dialogue through some shared readings. We are expanding our definition of STEM. I am, really challenging people to think through what that looks like. We also are actually leading our university's participation in a national cohort dedicated to expanding the diversity of STEM faculty on campus. Typically, the center has been relegated to K-12 outreach and professional development, but we are actually at the table with academic affairs and our Center for Academic Excellence to create professional development and other kinds of activities supporting faculty that will grow environments in which some of these students who come to campus who may not see themselves as STEM thinkers begin to see themselves that way. The disconnect between higher education and their home areas that might be very rural becomes a little less of a divide. They begin to re-see themselves in some new ways. We're also looking through our materials library to see if it's representative of diverse groups and what we need to do to make it more so. We're funding professional development that targets long ignored connections like special education or career ready pathways. We're looking at how our materials are or are not available for teachers who have differently abled students. A lot of our manipulatives, a lot of our work is either not provided with bilingual instructions or is not appropriate for learners with various ability challenges or contexts. So we're actually working on that. And we're also reaching out to more non-PWIs, which is primarily white serving institutions, to offer opportunities for collaborations and internships and more. We don't just want to reach out to them to increase our likelihood for funding, although a lot of folks do that sometimes. We want to invite more of them into our space to help us rethink how we do things. And those are some of the initial steps that I'm challenging my folks. I'm going to see how far along with me they go, from my vision of just being a math and science education center to being a math and science equity center. And maybe next year I'll have an even more assertive kind of an approach to share with you that I've been able to push them through. Thank you very much. And please feel free to email me if there are some details here or other materials you might like to see. I'll close my screen now and watch for any comments or questions.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. That was very informative. I see John has his hand up. I'm just one quick housekeeping note. We got a message from Jeremy saying that this session would end at the 45-minute hour on the hour. I've asked him to double check that because that doesn't line up with what we thought. He's checking and he's going to get back to me. But I'm going to go ahead and call on, was it John? No, I just lost who had, yes, John, go ahead.
I was just applauding her presentation. I wasn't raising my hand.
Okay,
it was very
excellent.
well done.
Excellent. Then Tracy, we do have a question from Cal. Do you have any programs that reach out to informal settings in the communities?
We do. We have a variety of programming, and right now we're designing a whole new set of that in conjunction with our Gear Up program that is on our campus, and that currently involves about 12 different rural counties, many of which are currently not served by a university campus or any other STEM education center in their region. Those sometimes include taking out mobile units like the GeoBago. It can include taking groups out to some of our locations, for example, our sustainable farm that the university has, taking students there, Dark Sky Observatory for some astronomical experiences. Part of our work is connecting students to the university and seeing it as a resource and not something that runs counter to their own communities. You're probably like us. You've got students 25 miles away who've never set foot on a university campus, even though we're such a rich part of where they are. So a lot of ours is really built to simply build their familiarity and comfort with the institution. And then to build off of that in partnership with school districts, the appropriate kinds of content that they need after that. After school programming, partnering with our public libraries to provide another avenue for activities. And we did a variety, because of COVID, we did a variety of STEM at home camps over the summer, including Space Camp at home and a combination of pickup materials at the libraries, the public libraries, so they can involve themselves through STEM in their homes.
Tracy, is there much collaboration in North Carolina between different program providers?
I would say it's really geographically based. The central part of the state has the largest population and best communication structure to support the STEM ecosystems. There is a growing STEM ecosystem on the East Coast. STEM East is the name of one of those. It has a large geographical area where they really are connecting a lot of different providers with education, community, industry partners in a variety of ways. In the West, that's actually one of the things I'm trying to tackle as a director. In the absence of a well-developed network or well-developed ecosystem, just pockets of it, that's part of our strategic planning is, as a center, to also conduct a needs assessment across the entire western part of the state, and to then help not impose what that might look like, but to work with partners, identify those who are key nodes in that, and begin to develop what our communication needs to look like.
Cool.
Oh, I see Joanne has a question here about Indigenous communities regarding STEM education. I'll share something as a provider doing professional development over the years that has been informative to me. I started working with some school districts down around the Cherokee Nation in southwestern North Carolina for a while, and then actually provided some mathematics education, professional development over about a 2-year period. I was there in the schools monthly, helping to analyze the interactions among the students and the faculty, helping provide some content, professional development, and so on. But one of my very first visits there, I realized there was a person seated in the back of the room who did not interact with me, did not introduce himself, did not, there was no interaction. And then midway through the day, after I had carried on my professional development, he came up and introduced himself to me. And it turned out he was representative of the Cherokee. He had come to listen to how I presented the content to ensure that it was not derogatory of the Cherokee, that it was not critical of their abilities or the way that they interacted with the content, that I was finding ways to prompt these teachers to connect more powerfully with the students in their classroom who identified as Cherokee. And he explained that the benefits the students received who were Cherokee, the scholarship funding and so on that they were eligible for, the Cherokee saw themselves as having a rich investment in those students and wanting their success. And that meant making sure that all of those education providers knew how to go about doing that. And that, I'm not sure if that answers the question exactly as you posed it, but that's been one of the most powerful lessons that I've had. As another quick note, because I know we're about to wrap up, I did a couple of years ago a summer workshop using native plant species and Appalachian ecosystems as the context for doing STEM. Our engineering was reverse engineering the ecosystem and creating working modules of plants. And yes, working, they had to find a component of the plant itself that they could work. I actually had a couple of participants who were indigenous to West Africa here participating in that workshop. And the interactions we were able to have between those teachers and the ones who were culturally from Appalachian for over 200 years, and the exchange that they had around the importance of plants and things in the ecosystem was also incredibly powerful for all of the teachers who were involved.
Thanks, Tracy. I see we've got Kelly in the room now, and we're privately chatting here. She tells me the other 2 breakouts are wrapping up, so we probably should too, so that we can all push out into the main room. It's different than what we had planned, but hey, we're flexible. That's what rural is mostly good at, is being flexible. But before you leave, make sure you put your contact information in the rural convening spreadsheet, which I haven't done yet myself because I've been recording and I didn't know if that would mess this up. So let's make sure you do that. And then we're going to get pushed out in like 2 minutes. So in 2 minutes, no?
I didn't close them. So I wanted to say, if you guys want to take the next 10 minutes,
10,
to kind of
okay.
come together, 10, 15 minutes to come together and say, what are you going to share to the other groups when we go back? Come up with like some couple of aha moments. But we'll take a break as soon as we head back. We'll be like, get ready, go pee. We'll do a Jake break or something. And then we want to hear what happened in this room. That way we have time to share before we have to end the meeting today.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, team. You guys were you were the biggest room. So I was like, oh, you guys had probably a lot more discussion to have. So excellent.
Okay. So here's what I would recommend. Joanne has been taking notes, but since we've had 3 really awesome presenters, some great questions, if anyone would make some suggestions, please, to Joanne of what should be shared out. Joanne, if you're comfortable with that, could you kind of compile for us. And then if there's anyone that wants, obviously, I'm not going to keep anyone from speaking. If anyone wants to share out in the larger group, by all means do so.
Please do, yes.
Can I ask something
Yes,
from
Cal.
the speakers too? Would you be kind enough to send Joanne like a major point or 2 points from your presentation that you would like to call out around asset development, asset mapping, asset engagement? So if each of you would be kind enough to do that, I think that would help. That would help in the presentation.
One thing that I was writing down some things when Tracy, when you were speaking, the white collar versus blue collar, that really struck home with me, because I think we hear so often when we start talking about STEM careers, what do we talk about? Engineers, doctors, you know, it's those 4-year and beyond degrees, but we don't always talk about the blue collar, the mechanics, the plumbers, I mean, we need those people too. So to me, that was like, okay, I liked that. The way that you put that, I thought was quite good.
Yeah, Beth, I should mention, it's a great point, and I actually flag that as well, because something that it took me probably too long to realize when I switched from doing the science to talking about the science is the importance of showcasing and highlighting career opportunities or professional opportunities for students that, you know, if they want to leave high school and go into the workforce, there's plenty of opportunities even in the biomedical science career field that they can think about that they may not have ever even heard of before. And we are now trying to highlight, you know, high school diploma, associate degrees, bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and, you know, the more advanced skill sets as well.
One of the things that resonated with me from Tracy's conversation was respect for behaviors, cultural differences. We have a bi-national reservation. And when we work with students and we ask students to engage with others and to make eye contact and to learn to shake hands, etc., that's not part of their culture. And so it took us a long time to realize that we needed to work differently. We really needed to respect what was their behaviors, the way they were brought up, and give them a context. And in working with the chiefs and the elders for that particular tribe, we were much better able then to work with the kids and also with the teachers. So it was something, as we look at Western versus Indigenous, it really took us by surprise. So that piece that Tracy said really resonated with our experiences for doing professional development and direct service to kids.
If I can actually add a comment to that, Mary Margaret, I appreciate your note there. And one of the reasons I had been invited to participate so heavily in that school was to try to uncover some of those issues that were causing communication issues and lack of engagement of some of the Cherokee students in the classroom. And a lot of the school folks thought that the issue was going to come down to Cherokee versus non-Cherokee kind of characteristics, but it was not. It was more of a rural definition, because the school district thought anybody from within that county was considered to be part of the community, whereas the community thought anybody from 5 miles down the road with a different zip code was not part of the community.
True.
And y'all probably, I see y'all laughing about it, because as rural folks, that was the way it was. And so developing community then became an entirely more complex sort of a situation that we couldn't wrap around just, you know, individual demographics. It was, how do you define who belongs here, period?
I want to like call that statement out, because it is so true. And we all experience it. There's a reason, you know, people gravitate to rural communities, and then there's 20 miles in either direction. And those people are different. And so understanding those differences is both a huge value and an extremely difficult process, so that you can kind of balance all those variances.
And Cal, to add to that, when we work with students from multiple communities, one of our observations is very much that those students reflect their parents' values and perceptions of people who live in those other communities. And that's one of the barriers that we actively work to break down in order to develop collaborative skills and communication skills in the students that we work with, because all parental perceptions really are embedded in those kids, and presents a number of challenges for us.
I remember teaching 8th grade in one of those little communities, and every time a child talked, you could hear their parents speaking through their mouth, and it's like, oh, we have to work with this, and
The child would be appalled to think that that's really what was happening at that moment. They would never acknowledge that that was the case. Here in North Dakota, we have this dichotomy where it's like, you're not from around here, right? And if you've been here for 20 years, they'll still say that to you. But when we're looking for experts, we often forget to look right in our own backyard. We'll go to New York City and get someone in from some other place, and you've got an expert down the street at the local college. So this asset mapping, I think, is so important for these rural communities to flesh out the assets. We've got these talents, these skills right here in our own backyard. We need to utilize them and recognize them. Just because you work with these people all the time or you run into them at the grocery store doesn't mean that they don't have this wealth of knowledge that you can draw on. And in a rural community, sometimes we just kind of downplay that as, oh no, it's just what I do, I'm not that important. So we need to kind of draw them out. And that, I think, is what asset mapping can really help to do.
My wife used to call that the "you're never a prophet in your own home" syndrome.
Very true. Yeah.
On the other hand, as we try to build relationships among our community members, the strength is that they are our community members, and sometimes bringing in an outsider, as Cal said, even 20 miles away, that's an outsider. And that is not always taken kindly by people within our communities. So there's a balance between expertise and belongingness and the message that we send and how we send it.
I've been hearing, Tracy's from a four-year institution. I've been hearing this from ASU too a lot about how do we not be perceived of as parachuting? I have a great project. You should be a part of it. And then dropping the project and leaving, and they're never seen again. So, and there's been a lot of pushback. I mean, I work with border communities, the Mexican border communities, and there's a lot of pushback against cooperating with institutions of any kind.
That's true. And we've even had some counties who would not agree to provide access. This was previously when I was in Tennessee. Some counties that would not provide access to students or communities, with which they were connected to, because previous researchers had published very unflattering characterizations of them and had not done a very good job of hiding the fact of who they were. And so they really felt betrayed by someone who came in saying they were there to, share the story of this community. And then that was not the way it was presented. And it's hard to ever gain trust back in that kind of situation.
It takes time. I mean, I know that I've been working with some of these communities for quite a while, and they're starting to open up to the possibilities of collaboration again. But it definitely takes focus and time, and then honoring them for who they are.
And maybe
I think that's, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, maybe part of that is when we do asset mapping, we shouldn't take it for granted that all of those assets will always be open to us. It takes a consistent cultivation to maintain the assets as we see them in our ecosystems.
Yeah, agreed. The other thing I was going to mention too is I think that's the positive attitude that you need to bring into asset mapping as well. So that, and this was mentioned in chat earlier, we're looking for assets, not deficits. And so if you're talking about asset mapping later on down the road, and you to talk about, we found these wonderful assets in this community and we built on them and we leveraged them and we, it was a fabulous foundation, those kinds of positive comments, rather than we didn't find anybody who knew how to do X. That's not an asset. Let's talk about the assets. Let's not worry about the deficits. The deficits will go away when the assets are enhanced. So Joanne, are you getting what you need?
I think so. Yeah, I can't remember how many things Kelly said. I think she said 3. I have about 10, but I'll try and find a way to consolidate them nicely into 3 main points. But yeah, I think we're good. Yeah, that was really good. I had the pleasure of taking notes, and I find when I take notes, I focus a little bit more on what people are saying, and yeah, I got so much out of all of that. A lot of it really resonated. I mean, as I've mentioned, I'm currently jobless right now. I used to work at a STEM-rich institution at Science World in Vancouver, which I no longer do, but it's given me an opportunity to kind of reflect, and it really got me thinking that we need to reflect more. We all need to reflect more, regardless of whether we have a job or not. Yeah, and this has been really good. Yeah, I hope we get to kind of do this again, or stay connected, or something, because these 3 sessions have been really good. This one especially, I think, for me. But yeah, I will be, somehow we'll collect, we probably already have the information, the contact information for all of you, and people that have attended the previous sessions, and we will be sending the notes. I call them the highlighted outline of the 3 presentations that were made, but we'll send those out. I also included contact information in the notes, and where appropriate, website links too, so you can check those out.
That's great. And reflecting back to you, even on Rachel's at the early part, it's hard as we go along to remember everything that was said, but a great example of the assets that were found in that community, and that citizen science or community science, and bringing people together to discover things right there in your own community is a great place. It's what a great starting point for people to dip their toe into science and find out that I am a scientist. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I'm hearing a lot of conversation around trying to avoid parachuting and having programs like ours just come in and plop something and go away. So I really try to think about how we need to lead with trust, and trusting the community partners we're working with, that they know their community, and we're coming in with resources to kind of scaffold the work that they're already doing.
So can I
Thank you,
pick
guys.
something? I'm sorry, Dora, go on.
Okay, I just wanted to just chime in because everything you guys have been saying really resonates with a lot of what our Native Hawaiian Kupuna have been saying and teaching, and it's refreshing to hear, across the U.S. the same kind of sentiment, because I think we've had a lot of, and in Hawaii, we tend to get things maybe a little bit slower than the rest of the contiguous US sometimes, just because of our distance. But I think also this whole contextualizing things, making it place-based and relevant, because a lot of the solutions that work for the other states just does not work for us here in the islands. And every island is unique in the sense of community. And so the way that we speak, the way the resources are on each island, you think one state, but no, every island. So everything you guys have said, I can say, oh yeah, that's that island and that's that island. So I really appreciate that kind of, this is the energy that I think when we even looked at our institutions of higher ed, they're like creating siloed approaches and extra curriculum and all those things. I'm just looking at it going, this is not gonna help, you know? So I really just, this is the kind of rich context that I think we've been trying to gravitate to. So if you don't mind, I definitely want to reach out to all of you guys on some of those, on that spreadsheet. So we're here and we resonate with what you guys are all saying too, because I think we have a base of folks that really are practitioners.
Yeah, I assume we need to go back to the main room now. She gave us 15
Yeah.
minutes. That was 16 minutes
She's
ago.
she's going to push us out at
Oh,
some
okay.
point.
All right.
I don't know how we do that.
There'll be a pop-up that says we're closing the room.
Mhm.
Okay. I thought she wanted us to actually leave the room and join the group when we were ready.
Oh, I think there is a place to leave the room.
There is.
Maybe Jeremy can help us with that. He's in with us. Do you have something you could help us with, Jeremy?
Just leave the room.
Maybe that's it.
Yeah,
I was
that's it.
Okay,
gonna say,
well-
yeah, this is Michelle with SciTech. Yeah, if you hit the leave the room button, it should take us back to the
Okay,
main.
so we're going to leave the room. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.